We have some very important speakers this morning. Our first speaker is going to be Sarah Williams, who's a parent from the Save Downhills campaign. What an absolute inspiration that campaign has been. At the forefront, the battle in the education market is between Michael Gove and the Downhill School parent and teacher and support staff group. So a very important group of people. She's going to talk about the campaign at Downhills against affordable academies. And our second speaker will be Alistair Smith, who is National Secretary of the Anti-Academies Alliance and teacher and education activist.
So I thought I'd start by just talking a bit about the story of Downhills so far. Downhills is a good school. It always has been a good school. It doesn't get fantastic SATs results, but they're not bad SATs results. The government says that they want 60% to leave primary school with a level 4 attainment, and Downhills gets SATs results in the 60s. So it could do better, but it's not a bad school. It's a very caring school, cares for each child individually, and has had a long tradition of growing children in every aspect of their education, not just in the narrow bands of that testing is there to test. About 47% of children at the school don't start and finish at the school. So this is called churn, and Downhills has an extremely high rate of churn, much higher than even schools locally. We have children that maybe come in into year 3 or 4, having never spoken English and never been to school before, and obviously they're being asked to get to the same level as children who come in to the school at age 3 or 4. We obviously have lots and lots of different languages spoken at the school, lots and lots of different countries. Children come to our school. We have I think one of the highest levels in the country of Roma Gypsy children at our school, and they've always been very welcome, and traditionally they don't perform very well educationally, so lots of schools don't like to have Roma Gypsies at their schools. So we think we've got a very good school, but it has got a few issues. So Ofsted had put the school into what's called Notice to Improve, which isn't special measures, and during that time Mr Gove decided he would force the school to become an academy. And the governing body said, hang on, you can't do that to us. We're not in a category. You don't have the legislative powers to force us to become a sponsored academy. So Mr Gove sent in Ofsted, who put us straight into special measures. Now that was the same lead inspector that had inspected the school 4 months previously and found the leadership to be strong, and that the children were making good progress, and that progress within this Notice to Improve was satisfactory. So only 4 months later, she changed her mind and said the school was failing in every regard. So then it was just a waiting game. We were waiting for the governing body to be sacked, which was what the threat that was hanging over us. And of course that did happen, and we were given an interim executive board, and that's a board in to run the school of people picked by Mr Gove. 2 of those people were from the Harris Federation. They were called Robin Bosher and Dan Moynihan, but they're now called Sir Robin Bosher and Sir Dan Moynihan. That IEB, once in place, the legislation that Mr Gove has is that they have to consult the stakeholders of the school, that's the whole community, not just the parents and teachers, but local head teachers, counsellors, anybody who has a stake in that school. So the IEB employed Cambridge Education to run a very extensive consultation costing the taxpayers £45,000. And when that consultation came in, if you print it off, it's on the school website if you want to have a look, it will fill a full lever arch file with documentation. And within that lever arch file, there is no voice which says this should become an academy. Even what the chair of our IEB says isn't really that he thinks it should become an academy. He doesn't make a firm decision within that. So Mr. Gove looked through these documents. He spent what turned out to be 40 minutes between this document being published and him deciding we should become a Harris Federation Academy. I don't know how he read all that in 40 minutes. He decided we should become a Harris Academy. Now, the situation we're at the minute with that is, of course, we think he should have taken notice of the consultation, and that because that consultation is in the legislation, he has to take notice of it. So we are seeking a judicial review. But not just based on that, there are actually 4 threads to it. So currently, there's a letter of claim to the DFE and to the IEB, and Mr. Gove has till Friday to respond to that. And he can either respond that he concedes and we stay a community school, or he can respond that we don't, and that is the court action begins. There's no middle ground to that. Now, I also wanted to talk to you about what privatisation actually really means to us at the school, and what it means to me as a parent of children at the school. Because privatisation is this word that's bandied around, and lots of people think, well, you say you've privatised this and privatised that, but I go to my GP and I get a service that's similar to it used to be before, or one of my children goes to a secondary academy and it's absolutely fine. There's no problem in that school. Nothing's changed. It's just like it used to be. We say that's absolutely fine. Of course it is, because sometimes we get a benign dictator and sometimes we have a malign dictator, and all they've got is the benign one. But when that dictator changes, when that head teacher retires or moves on to another school, the whole system changes, and it could be a system nobody likes. And at that stage, they say, we don't like this. Well, what is there to do? What is plan B? A private company owns the school. The private company will be paying the teachers. The school doesn't exist apart from the private company anymore. It doesn't belong to a community. The community can't do anything. Presumably, these schools are just going to fail. Who knows what's going to happen to them? To our school, this Harris Federation, they're an extremely aggressive corporate organisation. They do not have to publish any of their accounts because they are neither a charity or a private company. They're in this middle ground whereby they don't have to answer freedom of information requests, and they don't have to show us any of their financial dealings. Now, this is taxpayer government funding. This is your and I money being given to them. Now, I've heard it been spoken about as money laundering within the Conservative Party, where they can just give money to their friends in this clean way. The Chief Executive, Sir Dan Moynihan of the Harris Federation, gets over £250,000 a year for doing what he does. This is more than directors for education in local authorities. It's totally out of... And they can... I could go on about the Harris Federation for a very long time. But I think for me what it means is I lose any role, any stake in my children's education, and I think that's got to be wrong, and we need to stop it.
I want to just go back and look at the title of the meeting and focus on and try and paint you a picture of the scale of privatisation that is planned for education. Now, people understand this in the NHS, but people aren't really grasping what is being proposed in education. I want to start with Michael Gove, who I have a Twitter hashtag say get Gove, because Gove is at the very centre of this, and we need to understand that. Gove is perhaps the most right-wing of all the cabinet ministers. He is a neoconservative right-wing ideologue, and in the 2009 Tory Party manifesto, he used this phrase: he wanted to introduce a supply-side revolution into education. Well, that's the language of Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman. It is hardcore market ideology. He goes on in the manifesto, Tory Party manifesto, to talk about how he sees schools competing against each other in order to drive up standards. And this very hard-nosed ideology, he knew that he couldn't sell it. He knew he couldn't come out and say we're going to privatise all the schools, we're going to hand them all over to business. So he's dressed it up. And it's important to understand the dressing up, because the first thing that helped them with dressing it up was New Labour. Tony Blair introduced the Academies programme, and Tony Blair knew exactly what he was doing, but the vast majority of Labour Party MPs and Labour Party members who went along with the Academies programme when it was first set up believed that it was all to do with social justice, and to some extent there was an element of truth in this. When New Labour set up academies, they also gave schools often 20, 30, 40 million pounds of new buildings. So the Academies programme was launched in this sort of, with a mist round it, which said this is something to do with social justice, and we're still living with this problem, and that's why the Anti-Academies Alliance was set up, to try and deal with that issue. But since Gove came to power, the mist is clearing, and it's absolutely clear what's the intention. And I want to just give you one illustration, perhaps two illustrations. There's an outfit called Clarendon Academies, who describe themselves as venture capitalists, private equity venture capitalists. They did a piece for the Financial Times 3 or 4 months ago where they set out their strategy, which was to run 2,000 schools. This is like McDonald's running a chain of schools. It's that scale. The other example, just to really horrify you, is Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch has already bought into education. He's brought an American company called Wireless Generation. It's an IT company. He's employed a man called Joel Klein, who used to run New York City school system, and he has a vision of education that comes through IT terminals. You need one expert teacher, and then all the kids are sat in classrooms with a teaching assistant and a computer terminal, and that's how we'll educate. And Murdoch talks explicitly of a $500 billion education market. So when we're going on about privatisation, we're not joking. This is the plan, and Mr Gove, again, Mr Gove's plan is to say he wants every school to be an academy by 2015. So 3 years he wants to turn. Now, for people who don't know, we've got 20,000 schools in this country. 3,000 of them are secondary schools. Well, already 1,700 secondary schools are academies. So on the primary scale, where there's probably 16,000 primary schools, only 5% of primary schools, and that's why the battle at Downhills is so crucial, because if Gove is able to get away with privatising at such a fast rate, then we can see the whole system being privatised. But I want to now address the question of how do we fight it. The other, just as an aside, I'm really going to focus just on the academy question, but I am aware that there's a whole load of other issues in education. People will know about the reforms to phonics, the reforms to the curriculum, the whole offensive in terms of turning the clock back from a comprehensive system into a grammar, secondary, modern style system where children are segregated at young age. That's another part of Tory ideology, and we can bring it up in the discussion. I haven't time to do it justice here, but that's another part of the Tories thing. But certainly in terms of how do we change things, I want you to think of this. Well, who do schools belong to? Just in your own head, try and work out who do schools belong to. Do they belong to the children? Do they belong to the parents? Perhaps children and parents are the most important. Do they belong to the staff, the teachers? Do they belong to the head teacher, the governors, the local community, the local authority? They don't. When you think it through, I mean, perhaps even Mr Gove's entitled to some opinion over schools, but when you think it through, schools belong to the whole community. That's why we have a model of governance in schools. It's a stakeholder model of governance. Governing bodies are made up of different sections of the community because they've all got to be representative. What happens in an academy is that model of governance is completely replaced by a business, a company limited by guarantee, the Harris Federation or an individual business. A lot of the schools that have become academies are head teachers converting themselves into businesses, actually making themselves into businesses. Some of them have renamed themselves. They're no longer head teachers, they're CEOs. So, and they're being encouraged to turn their school into an academy and then merge or acquire other schools around the area. So when you think about who schools belong to, you can then start to think about how to change it. And what I think the Downhills campaign has shown really importantly is that parents and staff, the teachers and the support staff, can unite together, can win an argument together in the local community. Sarah didn't mention the scale of the campaign, but the Downhills campaign, when it first started, they held a public meeting in the school hall with 600 people at it. built within a space of perhaps 10 days. So very quickly, people understood the scale of the problem and people are willing to fight. And often I think we're told, oh, people aren't interested, they don't want to fight back. But actually, when parents understand the issues, they can form united fronts with the teachers, we can begin to see an alternative to changing things. The other thing that I think though is important about this as well is not seeing it simply just in terms of an education. You know, often people think about how do we get better schools, but one of the most important issues in schooling, one of the things that makes children, where children do best, is the issue of poverty. What's happening in our education system is you can't separate it out from what's happening in the rest of society. The Academies programme is part of privatisation, it's part of cuts, it's part of a wider strategy for austerity. And if we're thinking about how to change things in education, how to campaign, it's all very well as organisers and teachers and parents, but we need to organise across all things. So what I think one of the important aspects of the Downhills campaign is that we try to take the campaign into other workplaces, raising collections, getting solidarity from other trade union groups, obviously other schools as well around the country. But we need to try and generalise the battle in education so that everybody sees it as their issues. You can't leave fighting to defend education just to teachers and parents. It's an issue for everybody. Okay. The last point I want to make. I was reading this week. One of the things that the Tory government try to do is they continue to attack anybody who criticise this. We've been labelled enemies of promise. What was the other phrase they called us? Enemies of promise. We have a culture of low expectations, I think is the phrase. They say that we don't really care for our children. We just want mediocrity. And I was reading an article by Nick Gibb, who's one of the schools minister, and astonishingly, Nick Gibb, in justifying, he says that these reforms, the market reforms to education that the Tories, are actually progressive. And he cites Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist, to justify his case. I was astonished. So I spent a few hours trying to find out what Gramsci, how on earth could a Tory minister be citing Antonio Gramsci? And it comes back to, really, an argument about how we see education. What is education? Is education about experts pouring knowledge into people, or is education about constructing knowledge yourself? And certainly in the socialist tradition, and certainly in the tradition of activists fighting back, for us education is about self-organisation, about us working together to find solutions. That's part of what the idea of struggle. But in terms of the classroom, in terms of teachers, in terms of parents, we aren't experts who are pouring knowledge into people. We are people who are open for a discussion. You have to allow children to make mistakes. You have to develop a campaign, you have to develop your own education. That's a model of education, a progressive model of education that we need to put forward. And one of the difficulties we have, the notions of progressive education, the notions that Melissa Ben talks about of comprehensive education, these traditions have been quite badly set back in the last 30 years, partly because they were attacked by New Labour again. You know, Alistair Campbell attacked bog standard comprehensives. But the notion that we need a progressive, democratic and comprehensive education system is something that we've got to start fighting for. I know at the NUT National Conference they're talking about setting up a new national campaign for education. There is an awful lot of work to be done to present an alternative vision of education that isn't this exam-orientated, privatised model that we have now. So we can fight. We don't win all the battles against academy status. We would win if there were more fights, if those fights were linked up with more struggles over all the other issues in education, over pensions, over pay cuts and stuff. So we need to generalise the fight more, but most importantly we need to forge an alliance between everybody who works in education, with the parents, the teachers, and to some extent even the students as well. These alliances are crucial for us to be successful. Okay, I'll stop there.
I'm John Pryington. I'm in the SWP and I'm a medical tutor and lecturer at Oxford University. And I'm going to start off with what might be a controversial point, because I want to talk a little bit about the issue of falling standards from a point of view of someone who interviews kids who want to come to Oxford to read medicine or biomedical sciences. Because I guess I have mixed feelings about this whole issue. You know, Gove's been saying that there's falling standards, we should go back to O levels because GCSEs are not rigorous enough. And I guess my concerns, as I say, are mixed about this. And I was interested to see there's an article in the Socialist Review this month which I think echoes some of my concerns. Because on the one hand, as someone who went to comprehensive school, bends over backwards to try and get comprehensive kids to apply to Oxford, I can see how Gove's really just trying to use this to bash comprehensive education and just as the speakers have said, and bring in privatisation. But on the other hand, I can also see there's an issue there with when I do the interviewing, which is that I've got people coming for interview at Oxford who on paper seem to be, you know, absolutely brilliant. They've got 10 out of 10 A stars, they've got 100% in their ASA levels, and yet I think what we've seen is a kind of creeping sense of learning facts, isolated facts. When I get the kids, you know, in the first year of university, I find they often seem to be regurgitating isolated facts rather than really kind of problem solving or thinking. And I think there's an issue there that I'd like to kind of raise to see what people think about this essentially, because I can see how on the one hand this is very much about, you know, fighting the attacks by the Tories on comprehensive education, but also whether we should be challenging more, you know, the way in which the curriculum and the syllabus is actually forcing teachers to teach really. And I say this as someone who's had I have the luxury of teaching in a primary school classroom once a year. I go into my local state primary in Oxford, and basically we take over the classroom, we teach them about fertilisation, DNA, inheritance, using experiments. We fertilise a sea urchin egg under the microscope, we let the kids extract DNA from a strawberry, we freeze objects to talk about IVF and all these things, and regularly the kids all say this is the best lesson they've ever had. The teacher thinks it's all great, and yet this is very much outside the kind of the main syllabus of the year 6 students. It occurs after they've had the SATs tests. It's not anything to do with that really, and it seems like it's a kind of luxury added on that's not really part of the kind of main learning environment. So I wanted to just ask people really, you know, to what extent can myself as a university lecturer and tutor, somebody who wants to really actively intervene in schools and try and, well, first of all help to give my experience and knowledge as a scientist to state schools. Secondly, as someone who wants to attract kids to apply to Oxford, you know, how do we kind of tackle this kind of contradiction? Because I think I completely admire, you know, everyone who teaches in comprehensive education, but it seems to me that there's something wrong there, that the way that the kids are learning, and it's actually starting to influence the way kids come to learning at university. I have students who are increasingly saying, is it in the syllabus, is it core or is it peripheral? I say it's not about that, it's about whether it's exciting, whether it's interesting, whether you're actually going to learn something, and yet there's obviously a battle that I'm having there, and it seems to me it's an increasing problem that we face.
Can you hear me? Sorry. My name is Phil Brett. I'm a SWP member and I'm the NUT rep at Downhills Primary School. I wanted to actually respond to about 3 of the previous things that have been said actually. First of all, I think Sarah was extremely modest when she spoke. Alistair referred to it briefly of about a 600 strong meeting. We've had loads of public meetings. We also had a local march of 1,000 people. Also, I would say we had on our first strike day, we had a picket of about 40 or 50 people, which included parents and local teachers from other schools. The parents themselves organised a solidarity event in the park next door, which had workshops all around it, which ranged from poetry workshops to face painting to football matches, etc. And I would say about a third of the school was there with parents and children. And Alistair mentioned about a whole new way of education, not hierarchical. Well, I don't want to be pompous or overground on this, but it was interesting in the park. No one was really in charge, but behaviour was perfect. It was all organised smoothly, and it was one of the best strike days I've ever had. It was truly inspiring and wonderful. And I'd say also, Sarah, rather modestly, on our second strike day, again, parents supporting, you know, parents outside the school, leafleting in support of industrial action that actually puts them out. A lot of parents obviously have to give up work to look after their children. We then hired a double-decker to go to the Department of Education and take the message to Gove. We weren't allowed in. Even the children weren't allowed in to use the toilets because we were told this is the Department of Education, children are not allowed. So I would say that, and I would say, bearing in mind it started with just a small group of parents talking to myself and the other NUT rep, it does show what can be done. And Alistair's right, the solidarity, support, bringing the issue up in other schools is so important in other workplaces. When we on our first day, put all the messages of support on placards about the size of those, and we had over 30, just times Roman 12. There were so many, and that's inspiring. That helps us continue the fight. But what I would say is, even if we lose, I think that's not down to the NUT members or the Unison members who had the first ever strike against academies, or the wonderful work of the parents and the Anti-Academy Alliance, I should say. But actually our problem is that really the NUT should remember it's a national union of teachers, and I would say that it's important that the union starts not just allowing individual schools to fight academies, but linking us. Downhill's primary school, as wonderful as we are, versus Michael Gove is a rather unequal fight. And I would just finish on what the previous speaker said about the narrowing of the curriculum, and I'd actually agree. Anyone who's seen the draft, the new SATs, you thought they were bad, now they're going to get even worse, and the whole idea of learning poetry off by heart. Harris is already moving his tanks in. We're getting loads of Harris employees coming in. They actually were measuring children up. It was sick. The children were lined up in the corridor measuring up for their new school uniform. When they come in, their priority is not to engender a love of poetry, a love of history, of scientific inquiry. It's to get those SATs up. Everything will be engineered. We're looking at 67%, I think, this year, to get to the 80% that they've promised. That was the figure they've just... So anything else would be jettisoned. They're not interested in education for its sake of learning and understanding the world as we are socialists. They're just interested in a narrow focus. So I don't actually see the fight against academies and the fight against the narrowing of curriculum as separate. I think it's actually the same fight because one goes with the other. And as I would say, on a public thing, I'd like to say Sarah and the parents have been truly inspirational. It's been an honour to work with them, and still is.
Good morning, my name's Adam and I'm a student at John Leggett Sixth Form College in Scunthorpe, and my mum works as the school business manager at a local primary school, and they've recently had to transform to academy status, and it's important to know that not all academies are the same. There's the sort of the sponsored model which is being forced down Hill's throat, and then there's other sorts of academies. And basically what Dunsborough Primary School, the school which my mum works at, is doing is jumping before it's pushed. The government drastically wants all schools to become academies, and they're basically they're given the choice of either you can do it voluntarily on your own or we'll come after you. And often the carrot that is dangled in front is that we'll give you more money if you switch to an academy. And it's actually quite dangerous to do so because quite often when schools become part of academy chains, they are given the academy chain will help you transform into an academy, but in return, basically, they take away all control over the behaviour policy, over the uniform, over pretty much anything. And because of how they're set up, they don't need parents to be involved. They don't need the children at the school to be involved. And I think this is incredibly dangerous to whoever thinks that education is a community good as well as a good to the children. It does the community well to have good schools as well as the children themselves. And don't worry. And I think that what is important is that if schools are in the position of transforming to academies, it is probably better to transform to academies on their own and therefore still have a good school board. No, but
carry on. You could do your last sentence.
Yeah, but if schools are seriously in danger of becoming academies and sort of sponsored academies like Downhills, perhaps it's better to go down sort of the cooperative route, or to or to do it on your own, so that parents and teachers still have control over the schools. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got all the hands that I saw down, so if you be patient, go for it.
Hi, I'm Lynn Hubbard. I'm from Tottenham SWP, and I'm in the neighbouring school to Downhills. And again, Downhills has been a real inspiration to Belmont's school. Haringey's whole education policy is in crisis, as there are insufficient places in London for children to actually go to school. And I think the whole kind of issue at the moment, as well as academies, is the whole issue of free schools. And what happens if you're in a situation as a Labour council where you don't fight the education policy, then what you're going to do is actually try to squeeze children in. And what Belmont School is facing is basically a forced expansion in which there'll be no extra space, and the council admits it's run out of money. In the last few years, it's spent £20 million expanding 3 schools in the west of the borough, Muswell Hill, Crouch End and the posh part. It's now got £2 million to expand our school and no extra space, and it's going to force this through. And actually the argument about academies is really important, because David Lammy, who's now visited our school, he's the Labour MP for Tottenham, and he said, yes, I agree with you, it will destroy your school, and what you could do is become an academy. So the Labour MP is actually is suggesting to go against the Labour Council for us to become a voluntary academy. And I think we're going to have, our decision will be made on Tuesday, it will be forced through, and we'll then have an argument in the school about academies. And actually, the people we need to invite to the school are Downhills, really. We've had a good relationship with Downhills, we've sent money, and we had a banner on the demonstration, and all the time I've raised Downhills, because I think that it's really very important that we're trying to provide places for all our children. They're the same children in the same area. And it's very tempting for parents to say, you know, that's it, our Labour Council, there's a democratic deficit, they're not listening to us. And actually we could decide, as the previous speaker said, on having a nice academy. But, you know, I think really you are handing, you know, we haven't necessarily got the democracy we want, but actually, you know, even, as you say, which teachers you employ, the kind of philosophy in the school, all that will go. And, you know, it's out of the frying pan into the fire. And I really think it's very important that we don't go down that road of feeling that's a tempting option.
More hands than I can probably take, so I'm going to ask you to be quite brief.
Hi, my name's Mary Littlefield, I'm from Norwich SWP, and I want to talk about the campaign against a free school in Beccles in Suffolk. Now, Beccles is a small market town, it's in the middle of Tory Suffolk, it's a rural area. It's the last place you'd expect to find a really good campaign for a free school, but I think it started by 3 people. Incidentally, the report about whether or not we should have a free school in Beccles was done by the Cambridge Education, who the person who did the report has now been appointed the head teacher at the head of the free school, which just goes to show you how independent they are. And the free school is being proposed by an organisation called the Seckford Foundation, who have one fee-paying school, which is failing, it's in debt, and one other free school, and they're trying to expand. Now, we started off with maybe 3 or 4 people in the town who decided to do a petition, and we got, I mean, very, very easily went up to 3,000 to 4,000 petitions, which is signatures, which is brilliant. We've opposed it every stretch of the way. Seckford Foundation have been hounded every time they've showed their faces at a meeting or whatever. We went to all the consultation meetings. We've had pickets outside the council's, one of the council's meetings about it. So we've been very, very high profile. We've been in all the press, all the rest of it. Now, the proposal's been accepted, I mean, despite absolutely everything being against it on all their criteria, and we can't get the information from, what do you call it, freedom of information, they just refuse to give us it all. But we decided that, okay, it's been approved, we're not giving up. You know, we actually have decided that we'll carry on the campaign, which we are. We're still petitioning, we're still out on the streets, because what we can do is actually stop people sending their kids there. And it's a shame, what it says, it's unashamedly academic, this school, this proposed school. You know, and we've got perfectly good schools in the area. we've won the battle in terms of actually what people say, but we haven't won the battle because actually, I mean, us against Gove, again, it's like, you're against the giant Goliath of this machine that rolls on. But I just really wanted to say that actually it is possible for us to do it. I mean, at the minute, they have 37 kids. So they're spending, £7 million for 37 kids. And the message is getting across the local community. We just have to keep going. We can't give up. Even if we lose, we can't give up. And it's for the future. It means we're well placed with all those parents to actually have arguments about what kind of education we want for our kids, what kind of schools we want for our kids. So I'm really glad we've done it. And people, don't matter where you are, you can do it.
My name's Zav. This is my first time at Marxism. I'm a sixth form student at Tring School, and we have unfortunately just become an academy. And we did put up a little bit of a fight before, but my question is, I guess, what could have been done, what could be done in other situations, proper technical techniques, what could we have done to have got that united front better? Because it kind of came in as well at the same time as they're introducing their new uniform policy. There's talks about how they're going to treat staff with their new rights and how they can abuse staff's rights in terms of pay and hiring and firing as well. And this came in at the same time. They were trying to introduce a new sixth form dress code. So at the moment we can just wear something relatively, smart, casual, and kids can wear what they wear at school outside of school as well. You're not inflicting unnecessary costs upon families. But no, everyone now at our school will have to be wearing suits. No one can at working class at our school. It's blatantly pursuing middle class ideals. No one can at working class at our school. I've got 8 to 10 months left of education. I'm going to have to buy a suit for 8 to 10 months. I'm going to they're preparing us for university, preparing us for work. They throw down that university line down our throats. The apprenticeships and the wider learning opportunities. We don't want to hear about that. All about university. Preparing for university, what we're going to do, we're going to wear whatever we want at university. Yeah, I'm going to have to buy a suit. It's going to be completely redundant. And when we heard about this, we tried to get a united front of students together as soon as possible. They told us about this on the last day of term. These petty, disgusting little techniques. And so we just got 180 odd signatures of just sixth form students together, which was a majority of our sixth form. And we said, look, are you going to follow democratic tradition? Are you going to accept the demands of the majority of our sixth form? Are you going to carry on pursuing your ideals? And they just said, you know what, this school isn't a democracy, it's a dictatorship. It's a dictatorship. I was told this in a meeting with 3 leadership staff on my own, where they fired me from deputy head boy, and they were saying they were going to exclude me if I carried on fighting, so I was going to be prevented from education, I couldn't apply for university, all of this stuff. And I was really badly threatened. Then I was told by governors that I couldn't make a formal complaint, or my exclusion would become more likely. I felt bullied, and I meant to feel safe at a school. And this whole point is, how can we get more of a united front? This is a Tory stronghold, by the way. How can we get more of a united front together, getting more kids together? Kids felt like they couldn't protest. The school was saying, if you turn up, they made the analogy. They said it's like, if you come to school without a suit, if you come to school and you don't follow our demands, it's like going to a site and not wearing a hard hat. You won't be allowed on. These are the people, these are the kind of excuses that and kids would just shout out health and safety. Ignore that. These are the people who are running our schools. They're small-minded administrators. They aren't academics. Our school's led by the PE department and DT teachers. So, yeah. It's a real struggle, but how can we get teachers, kids together without them threatening of taking us all out of education? Yeah. So thank you.
Well, my name's Alan Barker. I work in a further education college in Nottingham, and further education lecturers really have an interest in this, because we went through a very similar process to the academisation process about 20 years ago, the 1992 Further and Higher Education Act. It essentially turned us into the FE equivalent of academies. And since that time, the lecturers' pay has gone down quite significantly. The terms and conditions of lecturers have substantially got worse. And I would argue that the quality of the educational provision that we provide is significantly worse than it should be. It's also the case that several further education colleges seem to want to become the sponsoring body of new academies. So FE really has an interest in this, and our union, the UCU, is trying to work with the NUT in trying to stop all of this. And the other point I want to make is we've recently had a new principal who's only been there about a year, but he is trying to take the commercialisation of further education significantly further than it already is. It hasn't quite made our students wear suits to college yet, but it's heading in that sort of direction. And in order to try to deal with people like him, we need to start bringing parents into this and students and widening our alliances. And the language that this guy uses is very similar to the sort of language that Alistair was reporting on earlier. You know, calling us mediocre and saying that we're living in the past and all this sort of thing. The ideology, even the language that these people use, is very, very similar right across the board. You know, from ideologues like Gove, who you kind of expected from, to college principals, they all work together. So someone mentioned a little earlier that we need to have the National Union of Teachers acting on this. That's correct, but I would even go further than that. This is an attack going right across the spectrum. I've heard colleagues of mine in universities complaining about the same thing. From primary school right the way through to universities, we have the same ideological attack from the right, and our resistance needs to be just as broad as that and just as big in order to combat this. So it isn't just about one union, it's about several unions. NESU, WT, UCU, parents groups, students, everybody should be coming together to resist these attacks.
Hi, my name is Dave Gurkis and I'm the NUT rep at Knoll Park Primary. And I know every school in Haringey wants to claim to be Downhill's neighbour now, but we are Downhill's neighbour. And in fact, my school is also threatened with was being forced into becoming an academy, as Downhill's are, until our governors capitulated and agreed to do it. Now, so people talk about the democratic deficit of that. 98% of our parents in a ballot in the school voted to oppose the academy. 100% of the staff in the school voted to oppose the academy. But when it comes down to it, there is no democracy. There's no, a handful of people can decide, oh, we're going to go for the academy, and that's it. Now, to be honest, we have been inspired. I don't know how they get in the room. Inspired, the heads must be so big. Downhill's people, we've been really inspired by them, and we were part of that March of 1,000 and the big meetings as well. But the fact that our governors decided to become an academy took the wind out of our sails in our school. But we've been slow getting the campaign back on board. But on next Thursday, the 12th of July, my school is going to be on strike opposing. Now, people are saying about the imbalance in forces. We have 20 NUT members in our school, and that, those 20 NUT members are the people that are now going up against the Secretary of State and the whole of the Tory agenda and the capitalist class, in fact. Every message that anyone from here can send to my school for that strike on Thursday, support, solidarity, in the run-up to next Thursday will be, I can't tell you how important that will be. It's immensely important. And I'll try and circulate my email address later and get every message we can. But the other thing I've got to say, if I've got time, so is also my Year 1 teacher, to kind of curriculum issue. Last week, I had to administer the so-called phonics test to my Year 1 class. Now, you either get pass or fail. That's what you have to tell the kids. You've passed or you've failed. These kids are 6 years old. Now, about 50% of my kids passed the test. The majority of them did fantastically well. They were brilliant, but we're having to tell them we failed. And that is the reality of education now. So when people say we need not just to fight on our own, it's absolutely true. This is an essential part of the boss's strategy against us. It is actually a class-wide issue, and we need to take it up on that level.
I'm Moses, a student at the University of East London and also a member of the SWP. I can't really contribute much to the debate around academies, but I just wanted to talk very briefly about the effects of the damage that the markets are causing in higher education and also directly at our university as an example of the relentless assault that the Tories are putting through and what our management have already enforced upon our university. We've had 400 staff sacked, we've had modules closing, we've had courses closing, our security outsourced, our canteen staff outsourced, and we're really beginning to feel the effects of the marketisation and privatisation within our institution. At the same time, because we're in East London, the management have also used the Olympics as an opportunity to enforce their ideological agenda of the way they see education. They've sold off our campus during the period of the Olympics. We're not even allowed to access our libraries, we're not allowed to access accommodation. Students have been kicked out of their accommodation. At the same time, we've got actually armed security on our campus. We've got a bricked wall around our campus and security sort of sensors to see if you have any sort of metal in your pocket, so really militarising our institution. And I think I just want to put it in its context and say that these attacks on education are systemic across the globe. If you look at Chile, if you look at Greece, if you look at Egypt, the neoliberalisation of education is going on globally, and I think that we need to be looking at how we develop a strategy to fight back. And I think we need to be looking state schools, further education, higher education to this autumn, and really be seeing how the hot autumn can shape our defence of education and our fight back against the Tories. The TUC have called a demonstration on October the 20th that I think that we need to be mobilising locally and nationally so that we can develop a political strategy to fight back against these Tories. And we've also got the possibility of the NUT and NASWAT forming an alliance around education, another thing that we can mobilise for locally to give us a national strategy. And the students have also called a demonstration on the 21st of November, and it's how we unite all of these struggles. And I think that's really the challenge that we're faced with now, is how we unite these struggles, how we develop a strategy to really shape an ideological alternative to what these Tories are trying to do to our education. So let's look to the hot autumn, let's get the unions and the students out and strike together. Student worker solidarity.
Hi, I'm Kit Hardy. I teach at, I'm an NUT rep, and I teach at Prue in South London, which is just sort of one of the latest casualties in the government's sell-off of all the educational assets. In fact, I think it's telling, really, that the first thing that they ask you for when they want to privatise are the land deeds to the property. I think that says it all, really. Anyway, Prues are some of the most damaged kids in society. In fact, the Charlie Taylor report, which came out in May, says it was commissioned by Gove in the aftermath of all the riots last summer, and they found that all these kids, basically most of them, came out of Prues, so he wanted to reform it. And one of his big plans was to privatize all the Prues by 2018. And it just came out that last week this has all changed. It's come forward because of the overwhelming support from Prues. 15, mind you, out of 421 expressed interest. This is the overwhelming support of turning into an academy. It's all moved forward to 2016, where these Prues will be made to become academies. And we are fighting this. There's no one really who wants this. In fact, all of the evidence in the last report cited about all the popularity of this is complete fabrication. It's untrue. So we're joining the campaign as well.
Terry Rigby, I've just completed a major piece of research on the academies, so particular interest here. First of all, people at Downhills, you must be a bloody good school because otherwise Harris wouldn't touch you. I know. That's the first lesson. Secondly, it's taken the DFE statisticians and copywriters 6 months to write an evaluation of academies of the last year, re-editing it and redrafting it in order to get the glimpse of a good story out of there. They've deferred their deadline from March and it finally came out last week. We need to get our research out, obviously. Secondly, on any count, whether it's GCSEs, EBAC, improvement, disadvantaged pupils, the academy's story is actually a disaster. They get children to sit their GCSEs in English and Maths 6 times over in order to squeeze a C grade out of them. They substitute easier qualifications like crazy. They do what Gove himself calls gaming to an incredible degree. They fail at the EBAC. There are a massive number of schools that come below the floor level, so-called. Only 1 in 5 roughly are improving faster than other schools. For disadvantaged pupils, provided the academies have been open over 5 years, disadvantaged pupils do better than in other schools. Well, I say better, 1 in 100 is the measure of it. No more data. I just want to say that the government claims that academies have got greater autonomy. Actually, they don't. They're more subject to the rule of the state. They're more obedient, more compliant. They're divorced from the local communities and from their own pupils, as we've heard, and subordinated to big business. The curriculum they're receiving is debased. It consists basically of English and Maths repeated multiple times, science and work preparation. Even if you get a glimpse of doing music, you do BTEC musical studies, which means planning how to stage an event. You know, nobody does a foreign language unless they already speak Tome. The kids don't do history and geography. It's a very, very strange setup. We've got to continue fighting this, and it does link up with the other campaign.
I'm from the Netherlands, and this all sounds really familiar for me, unfortunately. So I wanted to talk about 3 things briefly. The problem of education, the cutbacks, and the struggle in the Netherlands. So I think the problem with education is basically that it's aimed at producing a new line of workers based on numbers and not about what education really should be, personal development. So instead of just asking whose education, we should also ask what education. Because right now you're alienated in the way you learn and the things that you learn. For example, when I was in high school, a friend of mine got paid by her parents for any number above 7, so she got a certain amount of money. So it was really weird. And the cutbacks we see in the Netherlands right now are really the same as yours. They are aimed at driving the price of education up, so people have to pay more. They're also aimed at selecting people and refuse certain groups because they're harder to educate or they might not succeed, and they're aimed at hiring the success rates. So for instance, they're actually paying mentors for the amount of students they get to succeed. So they're not getting a usual pay, but just, no, when you get someone through, you get paid, otherwise no. And third, the struggle. There's been a struggle in special education because they just wanted to place all the children who need special care in huge classes next to other children and just make it a mass education. So that was a struggle, and also there was a struggle against the raising of hours. So they basically would take vacation hours of teachers, and it would force students to just sit in school for some extra hours without any education, but just sit in classrooms silently, working their homework, and not doing anything at all. Last thing, and then I want to wind up, we had a cleaner strike this year, and the cleaners went to university, they went on strike there, and they also occupied rooms. And in the beginning there was a small amount of staff and students supporting, but then the second day the support got larger, and actually the staff put in their own demands of better education. The students started to support it as well, and then the direction ran towards the cleaners and said, whoa, we hired the workers we sacked, and we give you higher pay, and we meet your demands, and we even give the catering personnel chance for a contract, because they were so scared of this getting out of hand and all these workers meeting each other and making a fist for the case.
Hey, good morning. I'm Ishan. I study at Manchester Business School. And I just wanted to say about what he just elaborated on schools belonging to community. I think there could be one more addition, and I think it not only belongs to the community, it belongs to the future. You know, if private companies start owning these schools, you know, a holistic development of students will get stopped. And one of, as I come from a business background, 20 years ago, one of the pioneers, one of the legends in business management, Peter Drucker, he said, economies should not focus upon either being manufacturing focused or being service industry focused. They should focus upon being knowledge economies, you know. And if we stop, if these private companies starts owning these schools, you know, a holistic development is stopped, knowledge economy will cannot perpetuate, and any country that enforces this kind of education system, I think, will lose out their competitive advantage in the future. You know, and my worst fear is if corporations starts owning this school, they can manipulate what's written in the textbooks, especially what's in the history. If they start manipulating what's written in history, they can control our minds, and we literally don't want to be controlled by anyone, or the development should not be controlled by anyone. And you know, there was a very interesting research done at MIT, after the recent financial crisis, and the research said that money triggers the same part in the brain neurological system as the same part triggered by cocaine. So, you know, that's what a very interesting research. And if these greedy corporations starts owning up and promote competition rather than collaboration within children, you know, the whole concept of evolution will just fall apart. That's what I want to conclude with. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tom Hall. I live in Tottenham. I actually live around the corner from Downhills, and me and my partner we chose Downhills for our daughter before Gove targeted it. We got showed around. We felt it was a really good school. We liked the teachers and we liked the ethos, which was really inclusive. But when we visited last week, along with other new parents, we had very mixed feelings. The new head, because the old head resigned, I think, under the pressure. Well, the new head seemed very defensive and an apologist for academies, really. When I asked, would parents' voices be heard in the new setup, she said, well, you know, there'll be 2 parent governors, but you know, obviously that's the minority. And when I asked about the ethos of the school, she just said, Harris are going to challenge Downhills to become a better school. And she sort of repeated that a number of times when people asked questions. But at the same time, I say mixed feelings, because at the same time the teachers are still there, and I had a chat with the class teacher, and he seemed great. But yeah, I just don't know what to do now. And has Gove won? That's my question.
No. Hello, my name's Penny Foskett. I have been a sixth form college teacher and NUT rep for many years. I've been involved in my local anti-academies campaign. I've been going around to various schools who were thinking about becoming academies. So I've been doing that. But at the same time, as a sixth form college teacher and rep, we have in the NUT been meeting locally. There are 10 colleges. We've been meeting locally for more than 20 years to help each other, to support each other, and to help each other kind of organise. Anyway, nationally, the sixth form college NUT members have been organising, and really it's organisation I want to talk about. Because obviously with anti-academies, there are 2 strands really. As Alistair was saying, there are many schools that have already gone academy, and there are obviously many more that haven't. And we've got to campaign with both groups. And I want to concentrate a little bit now on the schools that have gone academy, because the NUT, I think, is quite keen to do something with the schools that have become academies. And they want, one of the ideas they've got is to translate the sixth form college model, where we have become independent organisations 20 years ago, as the colleague from FE said a while back, where the NUT rep in a sixth form college has to act as the local association secretary. You have to negotiate with your principal as if you were the local association secretary. So those reps have to take on a completely different role. But the NUT is keen to do something about that. They're setting up academy reps meetings. We had one yesterday. I've just retired, and I've now they asked if I'd like to help organise in academy schools, and I thought, yeah, I'll do that. So I went to a meeting yesterday of academy reps in my local area, and I think I want to say really why I'm saying this. I think it's a really good opportunity if there are other NUT reps around in this meeting and generally on the left in the SWP and so on, that the NUT is looking for people who are prepared to go into schools, to do meetings, to help reps, to campaign against anti-academies. Seems to me it's a fantastic opportunity for us to get involved in organising, helping people. Once they become academies, you know, we mustn't just think, oh, well, that's it, they're becoming academies, nothing we can do about it. There are opportunities, we can do something about it, and there are opportunities perhaps for individuals here who are involved in that situation to actually do something to help our colleagues in academies.
Hi, my name's Gemma Fowler. I'm also in Oxford, like John. Sadly, my school is in one of the schools across the country in the lowest 5% in terms of deprivation. We've never achieved our floor targets. It's not something to be proud of, but it's nothing to do with the amount of effort or determination by the teachers. 69% of our children coming into our nursery are already 18 months behind, so they're actually working at the level of an 18-month-old. By the time they leave our early years, we only have 23% who are behind. However, that still isn't enough. When the DFE came round and told us that we were going to become an enforced academy, we were going to be sponsored by a local secondary school who's just chosen to become an academy. Morale is low anyway at our school. It kind of sunk because we didn't really feel as if we had an option. It was a case of we either get taken over by the local secondary school or we get taken over by a business. Thankfully, the DFE have recognised that the secondary school who want to sponsor us haven't actually achieved their own objective in raising their own standards and don't actually have the capacity to be able to raise our standards. That's given us a bit of a breathing space. The current year sixes have been taught to pass the test all year. They've had Monday is independent writing, Tuesday word class, reading comprehension, Wednesday text organisation, Thursday composition effect, Friday independent writing. It's a big sadness, and also in terms of our appraisal and our performance management, one of our objectives to be able to raise standards has been to raise the percentage of teaching from good or above to 80%. Last week when they did the observations, it turned out that only 67% were good or above, so they re-observed everybody at the end of the week and have now achieved their objective of 80% and above. It's absolutely shocking and very much in line with what John's saying about how we develop a decent system of education. I really don't think wearing blazers in our school when the children can't afford a pair of shoes, how they're going to spend £75 on a blazer is incredible. So hopefully the fight goes on. Thank you.
First thing, has Gove won? Well, he's winning lots of battles, but he ain't won the war, and that's really the central thing that the Anti-Academies Alliance is set up for, is we knew that Gove has an awful lot of power, but we've got to keep fighting. And when someone asks, what more can you do to build alliances? Well, that's a job for contacting the Anti-Academies Alliance and working out, in almost all of these campaigns, there's different individual circumstances. It depends whether you can get governors to help, it depends whether you get parents on board, so you've got to look at each concrete situation and work out, and I really do urge people, there's people in this room who are fighting campaigns that we don't know about, and I would really like to meet with you and talk to you so we can keep in contact. The questions that I wanted to pick up on that I think are the most important, which aren't really about the privatisation, is the issue that you raised about falling standards. You see, are standards falling? No. The children aren't getting more stupid. You read the Tory press and they say the exams are easier and the whole system. Children aren't getting more stupid, but the education that we're being forced to teach, the system that we are being forced, that all our teachers are being forced to go along like, teaching in a certain way, is causing damage to our children. It is actually child abuse, half of it. I mean, the phonics test and things like this, the endless testing of SATs has damaged our attitude and approach to education so that children become cut off and disaffected. You know, the biggest problem in this country is the long tail of underachievement. We have more poorer children in this country doing worse than anywhere else in Western Europe, and that's our real problem. And there are solutions to that. There are national education systems where you can have progressive education. Finland is a good example of it, where the sorts of lessons that you're talking about with science, where you're doing practical work all the time in science, is normal day-to-day practice in Finnish schools. That's how the system, because that's a system that's controlled by teachers and parents, real autonomy. So there is a real problem with falling standards, in the sense that we want a progressive system, but we shouldn't fall for the lies that Gove, because Gove is using falling standards as an excuse to privatise the education system. Just the last point, it really is a question about democracy, and what I said at the beginning is who the schools belong to. These are our schools, and we have to fight every single bit of the way to get control back over them, both of the curriculum and over privatisation. This is a smash and grab, and we've got to keep fighting. Even if we lose individual battles, every fight helps us stronger, makes us stronger for the next one.
I quickly just wanted to say something about actually the campaign, because running a campaign, there's maybe about 20 of us that do lots and lots of work, and that the most important thing, I think, and probably the lady from Beccles would concur, is talking to people and actually looking people in the eye and talking to people in the playground. We became the mad women in the playground every morning, talking to people. Hand them a leaflet, it's the excuse to talk to them. They won't read the leaflet. You've got to talk to everybody there, because when we explain the situation, nobody can disagree with us, because we're right. It's so right, and this is so wrong. What's occurring is an absolute tragedy, and I feel so sad for the man there whose child is going to come to our fantastic school, and he thinks, I can't. Now, what should I say to him? I'll go to the one down the road that's a good school, but Harris has got their eye on that school as well. This disease is going to spread, and it's going to spread really fast, and we have to work so hard to stop it happening. And Harris isn't going to open in our school on the 1st of September, no matter what, because they won't agree to any TUPE. So there's legislation that they can't possibly take over by then. And hopefully, if you all give us lots of money, we can fight this legal battle and win. We're not talking loads and loads of money, but if you go on our website, you see it says there how to. And we've got, Logan's got some stickers here to help with that as well. But also, so we're going to win is the thing with our school, and I can't think we're going to lose. But if that really, really unlikely event that we do lose, how Harris behave at our school will be much better than they would have behaved if we had not had a campaign. Which leads me on to the young man here who said that his mum's school chose, because then they have some sort of control and power. And of course we all want some control and power within our school, but it's not really there, it's a fiction. If you jump or if you're pushed, you're still dead at the bottom. Either way, okay? Last sentence, the role of the local authority. Nobody likes their local authority all over the country. I'm hearing it. Nobody likes their local authority. It's a smokescreen that they're the problem. They're not the problem. Mr. Gove is the problem. Work with your local authority. David Lammy works with us. He's actually going to be in a meeting to try and get the local authority to do what we need them to do for our legal campaign. You must work with them. They're not the real enemy.